I see everybody is joining us. We're going to go ahead and let everybody join in for a couple minutes, and then we will get started on our program, Toxic Buildup, What You Don't Know Does Hurt You, presented by the Summit at Sunland Springs and A Mind for All Seasons. Okay, that looks great. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We look forward to an interesting presentation on toxic buildup, what you don't know does hurt you. We are joined today by Collett, the CEO with A Mind for All Seasons, and Randy Vawdry, the Chief Medical Officer for A Mind for All Seasons, as well as Robeson Flynn, the memory coach here at the Summit. I'm Lori Marsh, the Marketing Director at the Summit, located in Mesa on Signal Butte. And without further delay, we'll jump right into it. Eric and Randy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lori. And thanks everybody for watching today. It's great to be with you. I want to start off by pointing out that what the Summit is doing there in East Mesa is really remarkable. It's a game changer for the entire assisted living industry. And I believe that one day people will look back on what the Summit has done and say, wow, the industry changed there. Because the Summit has really gone forward with the idea that instead of just having a good memory care community that keeps people comfortable as they're declining, and a great assisted living community that is doing everything that they can to help people have positive experiences, they are going further in terms of helping people not need their services in the first place. So their goal is actually to help people stay home as long as possible by using some really innovative approaches to brain health. And if that's not in the cards, then the goal is to provide treatment within the assisted living community that could get a person back home. And if that's not in the cards, could we keep you out of memory care? If that's not in the cards, could we help you go from memory care back to regular assisted living? Or if you need to stay in memory care long-term because you're just not going to improve that much, could we use some really innovative strategies that would help keep you from needing antipsychotics and help you still recognize loved ones and have the highest quality of life possible? Our topic today, toxicity, has a lot to do with helping the brain stay healthy. And to kind of set the stage and introduce you to the topic, I want to introduce you to this gentleman, Stephen Hopkins, who you may have read about last year in a New York Times article that was titled, "The Army Thought He Was Faking His Health Issues. It turns out he had chronic lead poisoning." So Stephen Hopkins had spent 5 years as an enlisted soldier in the Army from 1990 to 1995. And then in 2000, he decided to go back into the Army as an officer in one of the Special Forces groups. And he was really excited to train with them and go through all of the rigor physically that would demand of him. And as he started doing that, things were going great at first. But after a few years into the program, he was noticing some really challenging symptoms. He was having wild swings in his blood pressure and constant dizziness. He would get really, really nauseous. And it was crippling to the point of just derailing his career, it seemed. His heart rate would skyrocket. And he went to doctor after doctor, and they just didn't know what to do. And at one point, they were accusing him of malingering, which is sort of the military term for faking sickness to get out of military service. And that was totally offensive to Stephen Hopkins. He felt like, gosh, I'm trying to visit doctors so that I can stay in the military, not so that I get out of it. Well, some time went by, and finally in 2012, he collapsed in a parking lot. This was after he'd already been sent back to the United States. They couldn't figure out what to do with him. And here he just drops in this parking lot. And he was taken to the Walter Reed Medical Center, where a physician there examined him and started running a lot more extensive tests. And everything was starting to line up with possible lead poisoning, which is really tough to see with a blood test. So they sent him off to another hospital where they did some imaging, and they looked at his bones, and they found that he had 2.5 times the amount of lead that you would expect in a guy his age. Well, it turns out that there were a lot of other soldiers that came through over the next few years in that system, and they did the same kind of imaging and found, wow, lead poisoning is an issue. There are dozens of soldiers that have gone to the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, where Dr. Mark Hyman, who directs the clinic, and other physicians have worked with them to detoxify these soldiers from all these weird symptoms that are caused by heavy metal toxicity. Things like, the symptoms will sometimes mimic traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress disorder. They have impaired concentration. They might have anger issues. They might be anxious or really impulsive. They might have tremoring, high blood pressure, low sperm count. They might have some peripheral neuropathy where they just tingle and it's not easy to walk around because their feet feel like they're standing on pins and needles all the time. So this is a real issue that affects people in the military. Well, closer to home, there was an interesting video that came out, I believe in 2012, about some police officers in Utah. And I want to share a little bit of this video with you.
In the last decade, cops have busted over 1,000 methamphetamine labs in the state of Utah. But in putting themselves in harm's way to serve and protect the public, they have also been exposing themselves to a hidden killer, the meth lab itself.
The whole meth cop and their exposure has forever changed my life. I lost my husband because of his exposure to meth. My husband put himself on the line every day, and he loved what he did. He did it with a passion.
81 police officers in Utah have either died, have terminal illness, or are extremely sick. And the one common denominator in every one of these health situations is the officer spent large amounts of time in a drug lab.
We as cops, we put our lives on the line. We put our health and safety on the line every day. And one of them is we make a conscious decision to go in on a meth lab.
Chemicals can stay in carpet and walls and in the air, and a lot of times people are breathing this stuff. A lot of the different kinds of things that fall on the ground, and we walk in and it kicks up the dust and different things like that.
I started having acid reflux, heartburn, acid reflux almost every night. The headaches were every day. Spasms were sometimes several times a day, and this went on for quite a few years.
The worst symptoms when I started, I think, would have to be the joint pain and the lack of sleep. It was just wearing me out.
I went from 46 years of age, running half a marathon, to where I couldn't hardly get up and make it to the toilet in the morning.
A lot of fatigue, a lot of headaches, a lot of your concentration, loss of concentration and memory.
My heart would race, and I would feel like it was going to come right out of my chest at times.
And then the headaches, acid reflux, irritability came after that, and then depression.
Everything bothered me. My wife would ask me just an easy question in passing, and I would get angry with her.
And I started thinking that maybe it was the stress from the job that was causing all of the physical problems that I was having, and so I decided to retire. And I did, and after 6 months, nothing changed. I still had the headaches, I still had the spasms, I still had the acid reflux. Nothing was any better.
I was willing to try anything. I was sick of being sick. I wanted to get back to the kind of life I was used to living.
When I first heard about the program, I was probably a little bit skeptical. And then the more I heard about it, truthfully, I thought, you know, if there's a possibility that this could help make me feel better, then it would be worth the time.
Some of the things I started noticing almost immediately was I was able to sleep. Sleep a little bit longer. I was able to get to sleep on my own without medication.
Within the first 3 or 4 days, I was feeling noticeably different.
getting your body back to where it should be. You're giving your body what it needs and getting rid of the things that you were exposed to.
What this program or process does is that it raises the metabolic rate with the exercise and the nutritional support and the sauna with the heat.
And by the time the program was done, I wasn't having the spasms, and the headaches had gone away.
The biggest thing I noticed is my knees and my elbows and my hips all are pain-free. I wake up in the morning at 7 o'clock after getting 8 hours of sleep. I bounce right out of bed and I'm ready for the day.
I did notice I had more energy.
All right, well, time doesn't permit watching the entire video, but because it's September 11th, I want to skip forward to a really interesting part of these interviews. So we're going to go to about 14 minutes into this, and you can find it on YouTube, by the way, if you want to watch the whole thing. Here we go.
And she mentioned, well, you know, are you aware what happened after September 11th with this same program going in there that has successfully treated hundreds and hundreds of first responders? I said, no, and so I want to go see. So together we went to Ground Zero, to the clinic there, and talked to cops who were, you know, New York cops. They're cynics. They're like, I'm going to sit in a sauna and sweat and get better? I don't believe it. And then they do it, and it turns their lives around. And so, well, then that can work here. And so we started bringing some of those cops here to talk to our cops. Mm-hmm. And now we've treated 60-plus officers.
Isn't that amazing? You have all these cynical New York cops who think, oh, I'll sit in a sauna and that's going to help me, and yet it changes their lives. So here's a little shot of what these guys were doing, and some of them said that as little as 2 weeks into the program, their symptoms were turning around, and they're having long-term sustained recovery from this. So there's something to be said for sweating things out. This is a graph that shows in the blue some of their before scores where they're reporting their energy levels and their emotional well-being and their physical stamina, all those sorts of things. Remember the one cop that said, gosh, I was 46 years old and I went from running half marathons to being hardly able to get out of bed and make it to the bathroom in the morning. That is not normal. But after they went through this program, look at the red lines and how their scores across the board just boosted up. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, you've talked about soldiers, and I'm not a soldier. I don't get out there, and I'm not exposed to all that ordnance and some of the toxic things that happen on the battlefield or in Army camps. And I'm not a police officer going into meth labs, so what about me? Well, have you ever gone to a doctor with some kind of puzzling symptom, and maybe the doctor's run a bunch of tests and said, I don't know what to tell you? What if you are the doctor? Randy actually had some interesting experiences a few years ago where he was having some symptoms that were really suspicious, and he was running a bunch of tests and not finding a lot of answers. So I'm going to hand it over to Randy and let him tell you his story himself. I think it's pretty exciting.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. I see patients several times a week in my clinic, specifically for dementia or for all these weird symptoms that people have. And I've sat across from people who go to the wellness clinic and they get their wellness labs and they bring them back to me and the labs look perfect. And they don't feel perfect. They feel sick, they're tired, they're having headaches, they got chronic fatigue, they can't sleep anymore, they're depressed. And you know, in medicine, we have this tendency when a doctor can't figure out what's wrong, we automatically say, well, maybe you have depression. Maybe you have a little anxiety. You need to go see the psychiatrist. And not only is that offensive to the patient, but the doctors, the people sitting on my end of this spectrum feel self-conscious because we don't know what to do. Well, I experienced many of those same symptoms. And instead of sitting back saying, well, maybe I need to take an antidepressant, I thought, I am going to start digging and I'm going to figure out why things are not working out. And I'm going to talk to you about how I've done this, not just with myself, but with many of my patients. And so as we go forward with this, I'm going to explain how toxicity applies to all of you and all of your clients, okay? So going on, just to give you a heads up, when I was preparing for this lecture, I looked at what other people talked about from a toxicity standpoint. And I really resonated with this naturopathic doctor named Tracy. And so I took some of her concepts, and I want to give her credit. But when I move past these concepts, all of the patient case studies that I give you are patients that I have taken care of, that I have physically been involved with. So that being said, I want to dig into these case studies and let you know, first of all, we're going to define what is detox, and then how do you explore the symptoms? How do you differentiate symptoms of detox from other problems? We'll talk about case studies, and then we're going to talk about an approach about how you can address these from a standpoint of helping people to get better. Okay, so first of all, what does actual detoxification mean? Detoxification refers to the body's ability to reduce the burden or eliminate the toxin of our body. And within our bodies, you can have toxins that come from, that are attached to cells, or you can have toxins that are released as a part of cellular metabolism. And I'll explain that as we go. And then in reality, what we want to do is support the natural detox mechanisms of the body. So too often detox is whittled down into just take this supplement. But we've got to remember that our body was designed to naturally detoxify. From the liver, through the gallbladder, into the bowels. We push toxins from our bowels into the sewage, and then our lungs and our skin also are a part of that detox process. So I'm going to talk about how we strengthen those today. And I want to make sure everyone understands, why do we even care about this? The reason we care is that we live in a world where we are constantly exposed to the burden of toxins. And you saw those police officers there. By virtue of their job, they would have to go in and bust a drug dealer. In fact, at the time that Utah meth cops study was done, Utah was the #1 police department that busted meth labs nationwide. And so these cops would go into these meth homes and they would arrest people. They themselves didn't do meth, and they weren't smoking, and they weren't doing drugs, but because they were in the environment, those toxins accumulated in their body because of their environmental exposure, and it just made them all sick. Knowing that, that sickness persists over the course of a lifetime. And oftentimes in medicine, we don't do anything to reduce the burden. We just treat the symptoms. So we give acid reflux medicine, and we take Tylenol and Excedrin migraine, and we take sleep medicines to help us sleep, all while completely ignoring the toxic burden that might be building up. And if we understand that, we can actually slow the aging process and slow the degenerative process. And it's such a beautiful thing. So the common signs of toxicity, I've listed a whole bunch there, but I'm going to focus on those that are in blue and red. So first of all, most of the time, people that have toxicity on traditional tests, the normal blood results are things like their cholesterol and their CBC, and they're normal. That's not going to help you uncover toxicity. But these people almost always have chronic persistent headaches and migraines, or they have multiple chemical sensitivities. I can tell you, I've sat in front of a lot of people and I ask them, do you have any allergies? And they say, oh my gosh, where do you want me to start? I got allergies galore. And they just start naming them off. Mentally, I know there's a toxicity problem in that person. Some of them have rashes or skin eruptions that itch and they come and go and they can't figure that out. Almost everyone complains of chronic fatigue. And in fact, I'll show you a case study about chronic fatigue and how one of my clients was addressing that. Many of these individuals have irritable bowel, or they're chronically constipated. And I want you to think, if your sewage in your house was blocked up, would you get sick? Of course you would. So you've got to keep the pipes moving. And at the bottom of that screen, you'll see autoimmunity is a big part of this. Basically what happens is a toxin lodges itself in your tissues, and your own immune system says, that tissue's not right, I got to attack. And then we get rheumatoid arthritis, or we get Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And that's how our own immune system is attacking that toxin, which is actually embedded in the tissues of our own body, and it's called an autoimmune disease. So these are telltale signs of toxins. So here are some dead giveaways. In the dementia world, we're always looking at genetics. We want to know if people have the genes for Alzheimer's. And a telltale dead giveaway for toxicity is people who have symptoms of dementia but do not have the genetics for it. There's no family history, and their genes do not predispose them to traditional Alzheimer's. We see toxicity in people who are social drinkers or people who have consumed a lot of alcohol because it impairs their liver's ability to clear a toxin. We always suspect toxicity in people who have an atypical dementia. That means that they get Alzheimer's in their 40s or 50s, or they get executive problem functions. They can't find words, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, it kind of looks like dementia, but it doesn't really look like Alzheimer's. That's a toxin until proven otherwise. Anyone who's had their gallbladder out, or they've had cholecystitis, which means that the bile doesn't move very well, you got to be suspicious. And then I already talked about autoimmune diseases and chronic constipation. So on this topic of gallbladder, I want to show you some progress notes. I took screenshots from my medical software about a patient. So this was from a surgeon. And look at the date at the top of this, September 1st, 2020. This just happened. The surgeon sent me a progress note from a patient that I recently saw. And if you go to the next slide, the surgeon wrote in their progress note, a 28-year-old female who's had an extensive workup by the primary care provider. That was me. I'm the one that did the extensive workup. She has chronic nausea and vomiting and belly pain, but no fevers and no chills, right? So this doesn't look like a typical infectious progress. My progress note when I saw this young lady is I noted she's a little bit overweight. She's actually quite overweight. She had a BMI of 37.5, and I started working through a toxicity protocol with her, starting with diet. Get rid of the fast food, get rid of the processed foods. We've got to start with some fresh fruits, some natural and whole. And as I started this, she instantly wanted to go see the surgeon. She's a little bit impatient because this belly pain had persisted. So the surgeon did some testing, and this was the surgeon's progress note back to me. The surgeon did a test called a HIDA scan. And look at bullet number 1, normal HIDA scan with a gallbladder ejection fraction of 97%. Perfect gallbladder function from the testing standpoint of the gallbladder. But guess what the treatment intervention was? Recommended surgery to remove the gallbladder. I about had a panic attack. I'm like, no, don't remove your gallbladder. It's so important from a detox standpoint. And then the surgeon mentioned to her, even if I remove your gallbladder, there's a risk that that pain is not going to go away. And I thought, I can tell you right now, it's not going away. This person has not addressed the underlying problem. So if you have a history of gallbladder problems, you have a toxic problem until proven otherwise. And we can talk through that as we go on. So let's talk about some case studies. And I want you to understand that a case study is not a long, protracted, drawn-out clinical trial with hundreds of people. A case study talks about one individual. So I'm going to talk about 6 or 7 individuals that I've seen in the last 12 months in my practice and what's happened. The first one is a man that came to our clinic with a dementia. Born in his 50s, born in the 1950s, very proud, little bit cantankerous, quite ornery, to be honest with you. Joined the clinic in 2019, did not have the gene for Alzheimer's and did not have family history. But he did have some abnormalities that started cluing Eric and I into this problem. Elevated homocysteine, B12 problems, liver enzymes were a little bit elevated. Started with the protocol, and I suggested, look, you've got to look at toxic contributors to your dementia. So he says, okay, well, where do we start? And I asked a lot of questions, and we decided to start with heavy metals. So you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, I did some toxicity testing in September of 2019. So that was about 1 year ago, almost to the month, right? And the bars in yellow were his mercury levels. So this individual had mercury levels that fell in the 99th percentile. Now, if you'd asked this person beforehand, do you think you have risk of mercury toxicity? He would have said, not a snowball's chance. I've not been exposed to mercury. I just don't have it. This particular test actually looks at mercury that comes from fish and mercury that comes from dental amalgams or playing with a thermometer that's got liquid mercury in it. That's the second graph. So if you go to the next screen, I'll show you that we did a program. Now, detox isn't just drinking celery juice. or just taking a supplement. There's an entire protocol that the summit can teach you to follow. It includes some special forms of exercise, sauna therapy. In this particular case, we asked him, don't eat fish anymore because your mercury level from organic mercury or fish is very elevated. Now that's contrary to what most people would think because we think fish is very healthy, but in his case, he had to stay away from it. And then we started some supplements that we pushed through for a solid 6 months. And you'll see on this coming slide that we focused on specific toxic markers in the liver that included pathways of sulfation, glutathione use, and methylation. And there's some vitamins and minerals that are very important to support if you want to support those toxic pathways. So when I saw this patient back and we repeated the testing, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, the individual participated in a detox program from September until March. In March of 2020 of this year, we repeated those tests. The yellow bar were his original mercury levels, and the blue bar were his mercury levels after a detox protocol. Look at the difference. His methylmercury dropped more than 50%, and his total body burden dropped significantly. And Eric and I can tell you, complete change in his personality. That ornery, feisty, irritable, critical, angry, depressed, grumpy old man turned into actually quite charming and quite helpful and very pleasant. The tremors that he'd experienced and the Parkinson-like symptoms, gone. And he has said, my memory is as good now as it has been in 20 years ago. He notices a huge difference. And if you guys all remember the story of the Mad Hatter, the Mad Hatter was that they would put mercury to line these hats and it would soak in right through the skin. People weren't ingesting it, it came through their skull. And these people had slurred speech, memory problems, and tremors. And it became a phrase, mad as a hatter, that came from mercury. So what an interesting case study. I'll give you another case study. This is a 75-year-old dentist. And if I say the word dentist, and I ask you in the audience, what type of toxicity do you think he had? Many might say, oh, he's put in these mercury amalgam fillings. He probably had some toxicity from mercury. But I've highlighted another thing on that screen. Another element is he had 2 hip replacements. Okay, that's very common in our seniors. And you can see the other elements associated with his toxicity, but I'm going to focus on those hip replacements. I too did heavy metal testing with this individual, and he had very high levels of antimony, very high levels of lead, which everyone knows that's going to cause toxicity. And he had exquisitely elevated levels of cobalt. Now, many of you may not even be aware of cobalt, but he was in the 100th percentile. His cobalt levels were 30 times higher than they should be in an otherwise healthy individual. Well, we started a detox program, and lead dropped and antimony dropped, but cobalt never dropped. And I had been very familiar with some research done by a doctor named Dr. Stephen Towers about cobalt toxicity that comes from hip replacement surgery. If you go to the next slide in this, when someone has a hip replacement and that cobalt leaches out into their body and gets into their brain, they start having metabolic problems in their brain that you can identify on a PET scan, and it's called chronic toxic encephalopathy. Okay, so this is a toxic brain problem from that heavy metal. And on the next slide, you'll see here are some pictures of some of the scans. And I don't have time to explain the different functions of a scan, but I can tell you that those neurocognitive deficits at the bottom of your slide include short-term memory problems. They slow down, so their processing speeds get slower. They can't talk very good anymore. They lose their ability to speak. Their motor speeds and their coordination begin to become very impaired. This is very characteristic of cobalt toxicity. So we began putting this individual on a cobalt toxicity program. Now I wanted to show you their specific labs. On their urine cobalt, 33, and a normal level is like 1, right? Amazing how high this was. So we're starting to monitor both urine and serum levels of cobalt. But I admit to you, the difficult problem here is if we really want to treat this toxicity, this person would have to remove those hip implants because that's the source. And right now, the family's kind of sorting through. I've got a man in his 70s who may not tolerate surgery very well, so what are our treatment options? And that's one thing that we're starting to do. But that clues us into other people who may be younger and might be headed towards a hip replacement, or might have already had one, and after surgery, they didn't do very well. So that's a good case study to show you that there's some cobalt toxicities out there from hip replacements. We had another client, this one in their 50s, that served in the Gulf War. And when this individual came to the clinic for services, he was a 58-year-old physician that served as a radiologist and did 2 tours. And he slept right next to a burn pit where all day and all night long, that burn pit was burning the debris and garbage from a forward-based surgical unit. So all of the plastics and all of the things that they use in surgery that they were not able to sanitize just got burned. And he said that every day they flew soldiers in the morning under the cover of darkness for surgery, and then they would fly them out at night. And he would load patients on the transport and unload them. And he said I would wake up in the morning and I would just smell the fumes from that jet fuel and that exhaust. At some point, he wondered if there was radiation leakage from the CT scanner. This is just a quick copy of my note. And the thing that I wanted to point out is this physician actually worked at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. He had had the $1 million workup from the best physicians in the world, but no one looked at toxicity. Nobody. And that, I couldn't believe it. When we looked at toxic chemicals, sure enough, he had gasoline metabolites, he had styrene and ethyl benzene from burning plastics, and perchlorate deep in his system. And we started this patient on a protocol, and I've recently called this individual. He lives out of town, so we've done most of our coaching by telephone. When I called and said, do you want to repeat toxicity testing and see how you're doing? And his response is, Randy, I have hope. I haven't deteriorated. You set me up on a plan and I feel great. I'm good to just keep doing my plan. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. Medically retired as a physician, but now has hope that he's not going to deteriorate and melt into a memory care patient that can't remember his children's names, okay? Here's another case study that I'd like to share with you. This is a 72-year-old patient that had a non-Parkinson tremor. You've probably heard of people that have a benign tremor in one hand or one finger, and the doctors say, oh, it's not Parkinson's, but we don't really know what it is. Had a declining memory score, a long history of depression, a head injury in the past from an automobile accident, and he was a school teacher throughout his life. And when I hear school teacher, I'm always thinking mold is a potential exposure, because most of our schools have been around for 30 or 40 years, and the roof leaks and the air conditioner gets condensation and mold gets into that ventilation system and starts blowing. There's a problem with that, right? This particular patient ate the standard American diet and actually went to an online service to look at potential causes of toxicity by Dr. Bredesen. This is the RECODE report from Dr. Bredesen identifying toxicity as the #1 likely contributor of his cognitive decline. So I set him up on a testing protocol to see what kind of toxicity might he have. And look what we found. Sure enough, this is a mold profile. So looking at his mold, that third blue bar down says ochratoxin A. His mold measurements were completely off the charts elevated. Ochratoxin A exquisitely elevated. Mycophenolic acid at the very bottom of the screen, exquisitely elevated. Now this individual hasn't taught school for 10 years. He's retired. In addition to those mold toxins, this particular individual also had gasoline additives and plastics and rocket fuel, very similar to the doctor that I showed you. He ate a diet high in fast food. He constantly was spraying herbicides and pesticides. So this just kind of all accumulated in his body. Well, we gave him a detox protocol with a very detailed list. Here's all the things that you want to do. A week later, he comes back to me and he says, hey, Randy, my family doctor doesn't really support the detox recommendations. He says there's not really enough evidence and not enough clinical trials, so I'm going to opt out and not do that. And my response is, what are you going to do? And he looked at me, he's like, what do you mean? And I said, did your doctor give you any treatment recommendations for dementia? Zero. Did your doctor give you any treatment recommendations for that fine tremor and Parkinson's? Zero. Did your doctor have any plans for how to change your treatment protocol as you age? No, we're kind of going to do the same old thing. And I thought, what a tragedy. You're losing the opportunity. We've identified clear toxic loss, but because this is outside of the medical machine and outside of the standard of care, he opted out. I thought, my gosh, ask your audience, what would you do with that? Would you just say, yeah, forget it, I'm not going to do anything? Or would you give it a good faith effort? That's what I would do. Here's an interesting case study of one of my patients, a 70-year-old female with a long history of autoimmune, okay? Rheumatoid arthritis, hands are all gnarled, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And I thought this was so interesting. She had a hysterectomy in her early 40s. And when I asked her, what medicines do you take? She wrote down on her form, this is her handwriting, her #1 medicine was an energy drink. Think of that, a 70-year-old female with chronic fatigue tells me her #1 medicine is I drink a Monster every day. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is how people are handling chronic fatigue in our society. They're missing the opportunity to find the causes. She had so many chemical toxicities, she wasn't taking any medicine. She's allergic to everything, so she took a little magnesium and a supplement called rhodiola. Case in point, no history of Alzheimer's disease in her family, and she doesn't have the gene for Alzheimer's. So that's a telltale sign she's probably got a toxic problem. The other interesting thing about her is that she had early onset of symptoms, right? Autoimmune disease and multiple chemical sensitivity. So I'm just hearkening back to that previous slide. She did a ton of gardening and she's constantly spraying Roundup on all of her plants, right? And all of the weeds in her yard. So she's trying to kill the weeds. Well, guess what? Glyphosate levels were actually quite elevated. And when you look at her body's burden of herbicides and pesticides, they're off the charts. She's in the 100th percentile for all of the herbicides and pesticides that she's spraying on her garden. It's soaking through her skin, she's breathing it, and she actually told us that when she was a little girl, she'd watch the crop dusters fly overhead and spray things, and I thought, she's just accumulated that over time and hasn't been able to get rid of it, right? So just like we've done with all of our clients, we set up a very specific treatment protocol to help her. And we're going to see over time how she does. This testing is actually quite new. So Eric, moving on, how do we prime the detox pathways in our body? Well, let me talk to you about what we do. And the cool thing is, #1, it starts with diet. And I'm not talking about a specific diet, like a calorie-reduced weight loss diet. I'm talking about a diet that's rich in whole foods, natural, raw, organic, unprocessed, and unpackaged foods. If you're eating TV dinners every day, there's a problem with that. If you're eating TV dinners or dinners that have been packaged in a plastic container with an expiration date, you gotta think twice about that because that may be contributing to that chronic migraine that you're having every day. Water consumption, because so important, we've gotta keep things flowing through the body. And I put that on our slides today because during COVID, I've gotta wear a mask 90% of the time when I come to work. And I don't drink as much water when I got a mask on all day long. I have to make a conscious effort to drink water. You almost cannot do detox without some supplement support. The liver just needs that. And many individuals who have toxicity already have deficiencies in their ability to absorb toxins from their diet, or they've been on acid reflux medicine, or they've had chronic irritable bowel and diarrhea, and they need that level of support. Sweating and sauna is completely underutilized in the United States. Most of our seniors don't exercise anymore, and 99% of our seniors haven't broken a sweat in 10 years. They need sauna therapy. It will help change the way their body can clear toxin. I remember listening to a lecture once where the speaker said, our skin is our third kidney, and it allows us to pull fluids from our body outside of our bodies in a detox manner. And if you go back and watch that video that Eric showed at the beginning about those police officers, many of them reported getting into the sauna the first time and their sweat was black. It came out dark colored and it smelled like acetone, almost like they'd been out working in the garage with their engines of their cars. They get out of the sauna and it smelled like they'd been in a garage with gasoline and petroleum. That is how powerful toxicity can be through the use of a sauna. And as always, we support the liver in its ability to help us detoxify. I want to share with you a patient that gave me this statement. They came and they really wanted to cure Alzheimer's and get better. I met this patient because I spoke at an Alzheimer's support group. And the husband said to me, Randy, I wish I could tell you that my wife has gotten her memory back. She hasn't. But I can tell you that her rate of decline is remarkably different from all of the other participants in our Alzheimer's group. And I think back to that date that I spoke. This was in 2018. I spoke to this big audience in an Alzheimer's support group. And I knew some of the individuals in that room. And I think of how they are today. And I think of how this patient is with the M&M effect. She has not lost her ability to speak. She hasn't lost her ability to get dressed and to take care of her own personal hygiene, use the bathroom. She hasn't lost her social graces. I can crack a joke and she busts up laughing because she understands the context and she gets the joke. And she's very mindful of social cues. Thank you and please and honey, you know, I'm getting tired, can we go? Whereas people with Alzheimer's disease just get angry, kick the door and march out. And they compare how she's doing to how the others in her Alzheimer's group are doing who didn't do any intervention. And he says, my wife may not be 100% better, but she has absolutely maintained from where we started your program 18 months ago, where all the other members of our group have just tanked. And to me, it was such a testimonial to hear him say that. Some people will come back and say, well, Randy, there's some IV tox clinics. I can go get an IV with heavy chelators and glutathione and Myers cocktails and all of these things. What do you think of that? And I think there's absolutely a place for those treatments in the world. But I can tell you it's more expensive and it's generally too aggressive for senior citizens. Every time that I have had one of my clients do IV detox, they get worse before they get better. And the reason is it's like stirring the pot. If you take pond water and you let it settle and all of the settlement floats to the bottom, you have kind of a gray colored water and mud at the bottom. And when you stir that pot, it just raises all of that dirt and sediment into the system. And I think that's what happens when we're too aggressive with detox. It's very common in IV. So I would encourage people to be much more cautious and slow in their detox as seniors. Specifically, be patient and use a programmatic approach that would include things like clean up the diet, lots of hydration, macronutrients and micronutrients. We can really focus on building a plan that helps that. Total sobriety. Too many people say, hey, I'm just a social drinker. I just drink 3 or 4 times a week. Those are the same people that have problems with their memory. They got fine tremors. They don't sleep good at night, chronic headaches. And I say, you know what? We got to eliminate alcohol. It's just not going to help those detox pathways. We do the exercises they can. And naturally, there's so many other things, but I put sauna in red because it's so underutilized amongst our seniors. It's really quite tragic. So moving on to the next slide. Look, I want to make it clear that toxicity is real. It's totally underappreciated in our dementia community, and it's a massive contributor of cognitive decline. You can almost rest assured there's some element of toxicity for those individuals who have headaches and tremors. All their blood work was normal when they got them checked by their family doctor. They're occasionally using alcohol. They've been diagnosed with a dementia that's kind of atypical, meaning maybe it's an early onset dementia in the 40s or 50s. Maybe it's a Parkinson or a Lewy body. It doesn't really fit the category of Alzheimer's, and we can help people figure that out. Many of these have irritable bowel, autoimmune diseases, multiple allergies and chemical sensitivities. So many of them have had their gallbladder removed early in their life. They complain of chronic fatigue, and it was all passed off as you're just depressed and you've got anxiety. That's a tragedy. That's not the case. So what should happen? We should assume these people have a toxic encephalopathy. We work to identify what the toxin burden is, and then we start clearing them through the protocols that I've talked about today. Okay, so I'm going to turn the time over to Eric and let him talk about another one of our case studies that's actually quite a young man. Eric, take it away.
Thank you so much, Randy. And I hope you've really enjoyed this and the chance to walk through some of these case studies. So many people that we've worked with have seen elements of these things in themselves, and they've come forward and they've said, hey, maybe that's me. Well, let me tell you about a guy from right there in Arizona. He's given us permission to talk about him. He was the executive vice president of a large insurance company. And unfortunately, he started developing Alzheimer's symptoms in his early 60s. Now, this guy was like the picture of health. His college major was in physical education, and he would lift weights. He would run like crazy. He has been a heavy exerciser his whole life. He's eaten in a way that most people would consider perfect, not much in the way of processed food at all for decade after decade. And yet this guy is tanking to the point that he's got to hire an assistant at work to help him so that he doesn't make a mistake. And eventually that's not even enough. He went to see a neurologist, and then another neurologist, and then another one. And basically what he was told is, hey, you got early onset Alzheimer's disease. There's not much we can do. You can have a medication. Here's a couple of things you might choose from. So pick a medication. I don't think it's going to work very well. And get yourself a pack of sticky notes. And that was it. And it felt like a kick in the teeth to these guys. He was a very likely candidate for assisted living within the next few years. Well, he started participating in the enhanced protocol and started going to the summit at Sunland Springs for their outpatient program. And his children were a little bit irritated. They've got a few daughters, and their daughters and sons-in-law were saying, gosh, are you sure this is worth it? I mean, it kind of sounds like snake oil. I don't know. And what happened over time was pretty remarkable. As they participated in this comprehensive program called the Enhanced Protocol that is available right there in the Phoenix area through the work of the summit in conjunction with what we're doing at A Mind for All Seasons, Dave started making progress. Now, it took him a while. He spent months and months and months, and the decline stopped, and there were glimmers of hope here and there, but he wasn't getting that much better. And his kids were still saying, oh my gosh, are you sure? I don't know. And then we identified some toxic exposures. You see, Dave has the genetics for Alzheimer's disease. And so we weren't looking at toxicity right off the bat. But over time, we started seeing, hey, maybe there's more to this. And we started looking at the fact that he's worked in a lot of large office complexes where the air conditioner runs all the time, and maybe there was some mold buildup with that. And he also lived next to an orange grove that got sprayed regularly. So that automatically smacks of some toxicity, along with this kind of atypical presentation, notwithstanding his genetic tendencies. So we did a bunch of toxicity testing, and sure enough, he's got mold issues, he's got herbicides and pesticides built up in his system. And so Randy jumped through some hoops. They wanted to use their health savings account to buy things like a specialty air purifier to help eliminate some of the things that were coming into their home. They bought a red light therapy device that can be very helpful in terms of turning on energy production and boosting antioxidant production and other factors that will really help people in these situations begin to heal. And as he did that, things started to turn around in a much more dramatic way, to the point that he was on the phone not too long ago with an examiner from the Social Security Administration who was trying to figure out if they could approve his disability designation. And the examiner was so incredulous, so surprised that Dave was doing as well as he was in the conversation. He was able to answer every question from this guy. He was able to give detailed information. And so we got this text message from his wife saying, oh my gosh, Dave's on the phone with this examiner. And the guy said, you are doing remarkably well for having a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Like, he didn't even believe him. And then she explained that he went on to basically threaten Dave with not perjuring himself and talking about the consequences of perjury, as if he just didn't believe him at all. We took that as a really, really good sign. Well, we want you to hear things from Dave and his wife, Debbie, firsthand. So here's an excerpt from an interview that I had with them not too long ago. What kinds of changes have you both noticed as this has gone on? Maybe, Dave, we could start with what you've noticed in yourself and how you have felt about participating in the enhanced protocol. And then, Deb, let's get some feedback from you as well.
Okay. I'm stronger. I'm not going to say, you know, I'm lifting weights stronger, but physically I can see better, I can hear better, and I can express myself much better verbally.
I was a little bit skeptical because this has been a death sentence. I mean, even now people hear and they send me little crying emojis. We're so sorry about your husband. I'm like, because you don't know what you're talking about. But so I was skeptical. And every week Eric would call us and say, how's it going? I'm like, it's not. This is not happening. All we're doing is not eating sugar. And I just don't see the incremental growth. But when you live with someone 24/7, it's hard to see that. But all of a sudden in the last month or two, I've got my husband back. And his sense of humor, his sarcasm, which actually was a nice vacation, not having that for a while, but he's back. And we're not out of the woods. I don't want to pretend that everything's wonderful, but he is back and we engage in conversation and he plays with the grandkids and it's been remarkable. And it was like just turned on like a couple of months ago. Both these neurologists before, I mean, Mayo Clinic, you can't get better than Mayo Clinic, but it was like a Band-Aid. Here, do you want the Cinderella Band-Aid or the Batman Band-Aid? Because that's all we have. And it wasn't, nothing to do with diet or stress level. Dave's stress level was off the charts. You guys just went through every nook and cranny of his health and life and sleep and stress level, and it's made a gigantic difference. Why? And it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
Well, I never get tired of hearing that and seeing all of these situations with people that are legitimately improving. So let me just sum up the enhanced protocol and exactly what it is. We start with a really comprehensive blood panel and looking at 45 factors that affect brain health. And then we prepare this really comprehensive report and we look over everything that's going on in a person's health situation and in their life and medical history. And Randy puts together a treatment plan that's like it's like the user manual for your body. It tells you how to go from point A to point B. We translate that into a simple daily checklist, but even that can be tricky to implement because people run into a lot of questions. So we provide coaching to help through the dietary aspects and to provide support for the questions that come up. We provide coaching to help people figure out how to get as physically active as they need to be. We provide training for families when there's an actual dementia diagnosis involved and someone is running through the difficult situations that come up day to day and families are saying, hey, it's nice to implement all this, but I just want to know how to get my husband in the shower today. We provide really extensive training into how to do those kinds of things, and we guide you through that process. We give you unlimited access to a memory coach so that you can call and you can ask those questions and say, here's the problem I'm having today. What on earth do I do about this? So that instead of just visiting a doctor once every few months and having a few minutes of their time, you have a coach that takes you by the hand and says, come on, let's do this together. Let's walk this path and let's see if we can make a difference here and help you feel better. And then we use medical devices that really amplify your body's ability to heal. You've heard about one of those medical devices today in the form of a far infrared sauna that really induces a powerful sweat and activates that part of the body's detox pathway. Well, There is more hope than there has ever been. And because the summit at Sunland Springs has been willing to jump in and do something radically different and honestly try to help people not need their services in terms of residential care, but to prevent needing that. And if they do need full-time care, gosh, can we help you function better? Can we do some therapies that move it in a positive direction? They are making a massive difference, and they're leading the way for a totally different kind of healthcare experience, not only in assisted living, but just in general. And it's a great privilege to partner with them in doing all this. I hope it's been exciting to you today to learn more about all this. So Lori, I'm going to turn it back to you and to Robeson for any questions that people might have and any last thoughts that you have.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric and Randy. That was fascinating. It's interesting because my mother-in-law is about to get a new hip replacement, and I have another friend that just had a bunch of mercury and a bunch of fillings removed from her mouth because she was just feeling horrible, and she has heard about that being a contributing factor to toxins. And so you guys are really putting it in clear, easy to understand of what you can do to address this before it becomes too late. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Robeson Flynn, the memory coach here at the summit at Sunland Springs. We are so lucky to have him here with us. Robeson, why don't you tell us a little about what you do here and about the program that we are launching, the 6-month outpatient program.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori. I'm the memory coach here at the summit at Sunland Springs. I've been running the program here for about 2.5 years. We've worked with outpatient clients for probably 2 years of that, but we are opening a memory clinic here starting in October and really focusing on a lot of outpatient clients. We are starting a 6-month protocol starting in October. Now this will include things like helping folks out with their diet, as Eric and Randy were talking about how important that is. But the nuts and bolts of that oftentimes get to be a little bit more difficult. Oftentimes I'll, usually a few times a week, I'll get a picture message from a client that's like, oh, can I eat this? So handling the nuts and bolts day-to-day aspect of that is tremendously beneficial to our clients. The other thing is coming in to use our therapy devices, especially with exercise with oxygen therapy, as they were talking about in reference to toxic exposure. But things like anxiety can be a problem, where a audiovisual entrainment device comes in handy. And we also have what's called a V-Light, which is a photobiomodulation therapy. We also have an online support group. Now, it's really hard to go things alone. No man is an island. And being able to talk to people who are going through similar experiences is tremendously beneficial.
Great. Thank you so much, Robeson. I appreciate that. If you would like a free memory screening or some more information on our outpatient program that's starting in October, you can reach out to Robeson. The contact information is on the screen, or you can reply to one of the email invites that you received for this event. I will be sending out an email with a recording of this presentation, and we do have other webinars in the month of September that you will be invited to. We certainly do appreciate your time and being able to learn more about your brain and what you can do to help it. Thank you, Eric, Randy, and Robeson, and we will see all of you again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks.